Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. As Mike mentioned, I'm Courtney Nicolato, and I have the utmost privilege of serving as President and CEO of the United Way of Rhode Island. It goes without saying that I would prefer to be doing this with you all in person, but clearly we're in unprecedented times right now. COVID-19 is a public health crisis for certain, but it is also an extreme economic threat. In moments like this, we see the best in people. One of my favorite parts of my job. But it's also in challenges like this that our community comes together. And our community first mantra has definitely held true throughout this crisis. Over the past several weeks, the United Way has been supporting Rhode Island's response and will continue through its recovery. We've scaled our 211 services to help Rhode Islanders connect with critical services and support. Our call volumes are 3 to 4 times more than the norm, and consistently has been that way since March 1st. Nights, weekends, irregardless of time, folks are coming to 211 for help and support. Additionally, we're proud to partner with the Rhode Island Foundation to establish the COVID-19 Response Fund. Since March 17th, when we announced it with Governor Raimondo, we've raised $8.3 million and have dispersed those dollars to 181 nonprofit and frontline service organizations who are providing critical services in the response to COVID. But through all this, it has been even more clear that Rhode Island needs more housing. During the pandemic, our homes have become classrooms, workplaces, and places to heal. Housing, safe and affordable housing, in fact, is vital to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But housing, it also offers a pathway to our economic recovery. Even before COVID presented itself on the footsteps of Rhode Island, we have been staring down on a housing crisis that has threatened our economic resiliency. At last count, the capital city has less than 2% vacancy rate, well below the norm for safe and affordable housing vacancy opportunities. Our lack of affordable housing stock has made it nearly impossible for a family making $70,000 or less to afford to buy a home in most parts of Rhode Island. And more than 35% of Rhode Island households are housing cost burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income just for the roof over their head. We have a long tradition, an unfortunate one, but a long tradition of being first in and last out of any type of economic downturn or recession. Thankfully, we've made some policy changes in Rhode Island in the recent years that has strengthened our economy, but we have seen an economic crisis start so abruptly and spread so rapidly than the one we are all in the middle of today. Our labor department has reported more than 200,000 unemployment claims. Retail and restaurants may reopen next week, but the restrictions will truly limit commerce. This crisis will undoubtedly put a strain on our state budget, but we can't rebuild our economy unless we are looking at the core issues that have plagued Rhode Islanders for generations. The housing investments that Governor Raimondo proposed in what felt like so long ago in her State of the State earlier this year was a housing bond and a modest, sustainable revenue stream for housing, what would be the very first for Rhode Island. These are smart investments. Public investment in housing infrastructure will mean men and women in the building trades are back to work and stay at work. We know that when we're building things, we're supporting a myriad of different parts of the economy. These investments would also provide a down payment on a healthier future, which will lower public health costs, and we will be prepared, God forbid, if we're in this situation again. The governor's proposed elements or proposed additions around housing has had some opposition. The opposition has been around the sustainable revenue stream and how we get there. But what I've heard from those same groups that have said, the revenue model doesn't work, has also said, we truly believe in better investments for housing. So today, I encourage our legislators, our advocates, and our community leaders to be courageous, to be bold, to solve the problem, and find the solution so that Rhode Island is truly a safe and affordable place to call home. The United Way of Rhode Island has been dedicated to housing for a very long time. We are thrilled in our partnership with Homes Rhode Island, a coalition that is truly making an impact as it relates to this truly important topic. And United Way is excited to collaborate with each and every one of you to make sure that we can make this happen. This isn't about the tactics. We have to get to the strategies. We have to figure out the solution. So I'm excited to bring this amazing group of men and women to talk and share insights around housing. You'll hear shortly from Michelle Letterberg, Chief Legal Counsel and Chief Administrative Officer of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island. She is also the board chair of the United Way of Rhode Island, and I'm thrilled to get to work with her on a daily basis. She'll talk about how housing and healthcare are interconnected and how healthier communities create healthier economies. You'll hear from the amazing Karen Santilli, the President and CEO of Crossroads, Rhode Island, the state's leading provider in affordable housing. Karen will talk about Crossroads' focus on housing first and the return on investment that we see as a community, each and every one of us, when we ensure that people can avoid homelessness. You'll also hear from the outstanding Kyle Bennett, our Director of Public Policy and Research at the United Way of Rhode Island. He will focus on the housing crisis and specifically the impact that this housing crisis has on our men and women and our neighbors of color. And then finally, you'll hear from Brenda Clement, the Director of Housing Works Rhode Island, all of our go-to as it relates to data and information. She is a gift to our community, and she will speak in much detail around the data that we have seen and the issues we've seen in the policy issues as it relates to the housing crisis. Each of us, as well as our amazing advocates who work tirelessly every day for housing, bring a different perspective, and they bring a different point of entry to the fight, and that's where we need to come together. You'll notice that Paula Fonseca Fernandez was unable to join us from Centerville Bank. She did have a last-minute scheduling conflict and sends her regrets. And we share a core belief that the Rhode Island budget makers should do everything in their power to preserve the proposed bond and the proposed funding streams that Governor Raimondo bravely introduced in her budget earlier this year. And with that, I will turn it over to Michelle and thank her for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Courtney. I'm really pleased to be able to be here. As Courtney mentioned, I'm Michelle Letterberg. I am the Executive Vice President, Chief Administrative Officer at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island, as well as the Chair of the Board of United Way. Like United Way, Blue Cross recognizes the critical importance of creating access to safe and affordable housing. As Courtney shared, an investment in housing is a down payment on a healthier future for all Rhode Islanders. We didn't need a pandemic to show us that housing and healthcare are interconnected. Over the past decade, housing costs have outpaced earning, a trend that's left 40% of Rhode Islanders in homes they can't afford, as Courtney referenced, and Brenda says all the time. The persistent housing crisis is the root cause of many physical and behavioral health challenges in our state. We know this from the Rhode Island Life Index that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island conducted in partnership with Brown University last year, which looked at Rhode Islanders' perception of their health and well-being. The greatest barrier to health identified was access to safe and affordable housing. The stress of not having a safe place to live has effects that are wide-reaching and long-lasting. Families suffer the physical and behavioral health consequences that result from substandard living conditions. It's impossible to find employment if you don't have permanent housing. Children can't concentrate, let alone do well in school, if their situation, housing, is unstable. And we know that even more, that's so much more important now with remote learning. All of this leads to increased utilization of healthcare services, which leads to greater healthcare costs. We must address housing now to avoid the ongoing irreparable harm it is causing. We must reverse the trend. Healthier individuals and families build healthy, thriving communities. Blue Cross has changed the focus of our signature grant program, and we've committed to invest $700,000 in 14 Rhode Island organizations addressing access to affordable housing. Every one of us here today is interested in Rhode Island's recovery from this pandemic. But if we don't address our housing crisis as well, our economic recovery will not take root. The health and economic cost of COVID-19 is going to be substantial and require a long-term commitment to recovery. There is an overdue and unmet public health and economic need for sustained investments in housing. I'm proud to join this group in calling the General Assembly to take action this year on housing. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you so much. We appreciate your and Blue Cross's commitment to housing and ensuring that we're finding a place to live that is safe, affordable, and healthy for all. So thank you. I'll turn it over now to Karen Santilli, our President and CEO of Crossroads, Rhode Island.
Sorry, I needed to unmute. Thank you, Courtney. I'm really happy to and proud to be a part of this panel this morning. Good morning, everyone. As Courtney said, I'm Karen Santilli, President and CEO of Crossroads, Rhode Island. You know, obviously, we're in the middle of this crisis that no one among us has ever experienced before. And even today, nearly 2 months into social distancing and stay-at-home orders, it feels like we're still responding to new parts of this crisis. But I believe that we need to be shifting to recovery and resiliency. Of course, Crossroads will continue to support the emergency response. And I'm so proud of the work that we've done with the state and our partner service providers to help our shelter guests and our residents safely quarantine and isolate during this pandemic. We've stood with housing advocates to secure rapid response services in the face of this crisis. We need to keep doing that, but we also need to ensure that our state leaders are making smart investments to provide every Rhode Islander the opportunity to recover physically and economically in a secure home. You know, a friend and a mentor of mine says something that I often repeat, that the only proven solution to homelessness is housing. And during normal times, investment in housing has resulted in reduced public health care expenditures and improved health outcomes, as Michelle has mentioned. But these aren't normal times, and right now the needs are even more urgent. Providing homeless Rhode Islanders with access to rapid housing has been the difference between managing our curve and creating a hot zone for infection. Thankfully, Governor Raimondo and her teams recognizes this challenge, and she's taken steps to prioritize housing during COVID. Worked with HUD to make resources available. She's exploring new ways to use Medicaid to provide housing supports for low-income Rhode Islanders. And she has assured renters that evictions and a pause on utility shutoffs are going to continue. These are all measures that are critical and needed and have been part of our immediate response. But now we're sort of moving out of this immediate response phase into crisis, into rebuilding. And with some luck and some hard work and some courage, hopefully we'll make investments as we progress into recovery. While the state is undoubtedly facing significant budget challenges as we come out of this, the administration and the General Assembly must work together to preserve the funding proposed for housing and consider reforms to the original proposal to create more flexibility and investment in housing for people with extremely low or no income. Like Courtney says, we cannot afford for our decision makers to get lost in the debate about tactics or methodology. Rebuild our economy for everyone. We need to invest in housing. There's broad agreement on that, and it's up to the legislature to determine the best path for us to get there. If they pass a budget without support for housing, our economic recovery and health resiliency is at risk. We've had a housing crisis for years, as we've all talked about. This pandemic has made it even worse and more urgent. We need to invest now because we can't lose any more time to rebuild. Thank you for having me on this panel today.
And thanks for being a part of it. And thank you for your leadership, Karen, as I know the work, keeping our homeless neighbors safe has been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And so thank you for your leadership and for everything that Crossroads has done. I'll turn it over now to Kyle Bennett, our Director of Public Policy and Research at the United Way of Rhode Island. Kyle. Nope, Kyle, you're still on mute.
I'm still on mute.
There you go.
Thank you, Courtney, and good morning to this distinguished panel and all of the listeners and viewers out there. As Director of Public Policy and Research for United Way, I, along with our team, am positioned to advocate for policy changes that impact Rhode Islanders in significant ways. Along with our partners at Homes Rhode Island, we advocate for various policies that address affordable housing and work to eliminate barriers to access and sustained housing as our top priorities. In terms of impact, they relate to overall health, generational wealth, and the sense of belonging and community. This year, I've been encouraged by Governor Raimondo's approach to designing a budget, one that reflects many of Rhode Island's challenges while also supporting our opportunities. In this budget, the governor includes housing as a part of in this budget, the governor includes housing as a part of Rhode Island and its infrastructure, and proposes the investments that support this. Much of her budget resembles our larger housing policy agenda in the Homes Rhode Island Coalition. As a Black man who grew up in Rhode Island, I recognize that I've been fortunate enough to have a home with 3 generations of family members living together. We were always able to host additional family members for visits and sometimes even an extended stay when they were ill or relocating. I know the importance of having a place to call home. The governor's budget supports all of our goals by putting dollars in specified accounts that will increase available funding for housing production. Over the years, the current formula has supported housing production, preservation, and lead mitigation. With a new investment stream, we can begin to catch up with the per capita investments made by our neighbors in Connecticut and Massachusetts. This budget would create a minimum of 250 affordable housing units for low and moderate income Rhode Islanders each year. This is clearly a start. However, we know that without significant investment, we cannot support Rhode Islanders desperately in need of a place to call home. I'm proud to be here today and even prouder to work on this policy agenda longer term. Thank you, Courtney.
Kyle, thank you. And I think one of the things that you bring up is, well, lots of things that you bring up is incredibly important, but one of them is that, you know, our men and women and neighbors of color are dramatically, have been suffering way longer with the housing crisis than our Caucasian counterparts. And so I think this, like the public health crisis, there's a lot of synergies there.
Absolutely. Last week I was on another discussion panel and we shared the book written by Richard Rothstein, The Color of Law, where he delineates the impacts of housing, particularly on the Black community, but also on other communities of color, as institutional efforts to dissuade folks from gaining access to a primary point of revenue and long-term income generation, being our largest asset, homes. So I agree with you and thank you for the willingness to continue to participate in this work longer term.
Thank you, Kyle. We appreciate you being here and sharing your insights. I'll turn it over to the lovely Brenda Clement to share a little bit about the data related to housing and the housing crisis that has plagued Rhode Island. Brenda?
Thank you, and thank you again for the opportunity to participate. I don't really need to repeat too much of the data because many of you have already mentioned it and talked about it, but housing advocates like me have said for many, many years that the path to economic opportunity begins at your front door, and I think we all agree, and this crisis has certainly highlighted that nothing works right in your life if you don't have that safe and decent place to go to every night or to stay in to be safe from a public health crisis as well. And so I think that what we're presented with here in a reminder, you know, as we have already highlighted that we had an affordability problem before we entered COVID and the public health crisis that we're currently in. The average even if you were earning, as Courtney mentioned earlier, over $70,000, you could only afford to buy in a handful of communities in Rhode Island. If you were the average wage renter in our state, you could not afford to rent anywhere in the state. And as we know now that more and more people are unemployed and are going to be cost burdened or wondering how they pay their rent and mortgage after moratoriums are lifted and court systems open up, we know that there's going to be even more of a need for affordable housing. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of need that we're going to have to continue to address. Out of any crisis, though, I think becomes tremendous opportunities, and I'm hoping that this crisis finally is an opportunity for us to address some of those long-term racial inequities that we have seen in our state for many years. I hope it's a time for us to look at how we house our seniors. We've all, I know, been concerned with the huge numbers that we see in nursing homes and senior and congregate care facilities. We're all concerned about the homeless population, obviously, who lives in congregate care. So let's use this crisis as an opportunity to finally make those investments to address those longstanding problems in our community and use it as a way to move forward with economic recovery. An investment in housing makes sense on many fronts, not just to address those inequities, but also from a fiscal financial standpoint. When you build properties, they go back on local property tax rolls. You hire contractors to build and train these jobs. And by the way, we need more contractors and we need more workers in the trades. And so as we try to retrain people, this may be an opportunity again to retrain people into different jobs, into different programs as well. So an investment and the modest investment I think that we're asking the legislature to make, even at this difficult budget time, is money well spent and money that will leverage other dollars, not just federal dollars, but private dollars, and more importantly, put people back to work and put people into homes. We know that the other underlying issue of all of this is not just affordability, but also quality and condition of housing. And as more and more people stay in their home, making sure those homes are safe, and that children with asthma rates who are spending both school time and home time now in those schools are safe in those homes as well. And so again, more job opportunities and more opportunities for people to be rehabbing and restoring housing stock in our state as well too. So again, you know, this is not a new problem, but now with this crisis may be able to allow us to attack it in different ways and to use it as an opportunity to put people back to work and put people into homes.
Brenda, thank you so much. I think, you know, you share the same insights and guidance as many in the community. And I think you've seen that this has been a generational issue that has continued. But in a crisis like this, it has just brought it to the forefront. And I do agree with you. I have hope that this will help really truly re-engage a conversation in a bipartisan manner, right?
That's our state motto, right? We have to have hope.
Have to have hope, no question. You know, I think just to wrap up, and then we'll turn it over to questions. You know, Rhode Islanders, our goal at United Way is so that all Rhode Islanders have tools to really truly have a bright and prosperous future. So as we're looking to that hope, as we're looking to moving from a response to COVID to a recovery to COVID, it is critical for us to have the long-term lens and understand it will also have short-term benefits. And so a couple of things, if you think about housing, we know that will bring more jobs, different opportunities to train. We want, as everybody else does in the community, we want those 200,000 folks who are without work at the moment to come back to opportunities. We also know that housing brings economic growth. It brings additional tax dollars into the communities. We have to get them built first, and that's the critical component. We also know that homes, we're going to have a long-term need to maintain the health and well-being of folks who are trying to heal from COVID. This is not an issue that is stopping when Rhode Island reopens. This is going to be something over the long term. They need a place to heal, and they need a place to stay safe. We also know that the kids are learning. In my home right now, I have the dog sleeping right off camera. I have the kids upstairs doing their work. This is the world we're living in currently. And so we need to ensure that kids have homes to be not only healthy, but also to be able to learn and be able to focus. And so we are focused on continuing this conversation. I truly believe that this crisis in housing is way too significant to put it aside. We have to look and utilize this as an opportunity to put the investments in the right place. So thank you again to the panel for joining, and I'll turn it over now to see if we have any questions.
Great. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, everyone else. To those reporters on the line, if you hit the raise hand function, we will invite you in and bring you in to be able to ask a question. The first one up is Madeline List from the Providence Journal. Go ahead, Madeline. If you just unmute yourself, you'll be able to ask your question.
Hi, thank you. What type of money is coming in from the CARES Act federally, and how do you think that will be spent in the state?
Yeah, I can start, and if the team wants to fill in, that's great. You know, there's a number of different things that are coming in through CARES. As we know, that is temporary and is very response focused. And so, as an example, there was a launch of an emergency housing assistance program, which quite honestly, Karen and I just had a conversation, is a unbelievable start and is incredibly important, but it has a very specific criteria from HUD. So it is probably only going to serve 300 to 500 families when it's all said and done, and that just scratches the surface. There's a number of different other supports, but I'll turn it over to the team to see if you have anything else you want to share.
Hi, this is Brenda. Hi, Madeline. A number of things. I mean, I think, obviously as the CARES Act kind of put the pause button on moratoriums and foreclosures with at least some properties in the state, about 60% of house mortgage holders are covered by the CARES Act moratorium, and just about the same amount of renters are probably covered with that, although it's difficult to determine that. But also the bump up in funding and money for CDBG will be important for, again, ongoing rental assistance for a little bit broader of an income spectrum as well, and also some recovery for small businesses and others as with the CDBG fund. So there's a mixed bag of resources. We've been working closely with our congressional delegation, as our colleagues on the call have been, in the next recovery acts as well too, to try to continue to push forward on rental assistance. Right now, we are already experiencing and seeing people having trouble paying both April and May rent, but we know as unemployment benefits expire and that bump up that was also in the CARES Act of the $600 per week expires at the end of July. I think it is at this point that we're going to see more and more people having difficulty making rent or making mortgage payments. So it was a great and wonderful start, and a huge effort by our congressional delegation to make sure that Rhode Island received our fair share, but we know that more is going to be needed both at the federal and state level.
Great, thank you.
Looks like next up we've got Bill Bartholomew.
Hey, thanks so much to the panelists for a very informative discussion here. My question is, when it comes to really a statewide issue of Airbnb, universities that are providing housing in areas that were, maybe traditionally family housing, how can you leverage municipal support to at least regulate that sector in a way that is more equitable? Because frankly, that takes up, if you look at Newport, Middletown, a significant portion of housing stock that would be lowercase affordable housing, for example. Just using your bully pulpit or the General Assembly urging, whatever it may be, what do you have to say about that?
I will start. I mean, obviously that whole field and industry may be radically changed in the next 6 months to a year. So we'll have to see. But you're right that takes off a huge amount of rental housing stock in particular. We have about prior to COVID, we had about 70,000 students that entered into the state every year, and only on-site housing or on-campus housing for about half that number. So they had a huge impact, obviously, on the rental market. I think there, particularly with Airbnb and other things, there are things that local universities, local cities and towns can do through their taxation policies as well too, to encourage and charge commercial tax rates or other things to Airbnb and properties to encourage or to at least provide some resources back to a pool of affordable housing funding for the community. But I think you're raising a bigger issue about kind of a bigger need for a statewide plan and a vision around what we need for housing resources, where housing should be, how all players can contribute to it. And that's been lacking in our state, again, for a long time. And so again, I hope that this opportunity gives us the chance to finally get that all together and say, what is our vision, what are our needs, and how do we move forward on it?
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Do we have any other questions from anyone else on the line? Anyone else from the media that is looking to get a question in? Great. Seeing none, I will turn it back over to Courtney just to make any kind of final closing comments, and then we'll let everyone get back to the rest of their day.
Just a couple of thoughts. This will be on the Live United website as well as our social media properties. So we encourage folks to provide thoughts and guidance and questions on that, and our team will be checking on a routine basis. If you have an opportunity to give or volunteer, please do so. Please call a nonprofit organization. The United Way can certainly help point you in the right direction. If you want to help, we also need your voice. Your voice is critical to this. And so there's lots of advocacy opportunities. Please reach out to the United Way. Kyle and his team do great Advocacy 101 trainings to share your voice. You may think is too small in the grand scheme of things. It's not. And is powerful, and your legislators need to hear from you the importance of housing. So again, thank you to this amazing and awesome panel. We're so grateful for you taking time out of your schedules to share and emphasize the importance of housing, and thank you everyone for taking the time to listen.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity and for all the United Way's work, and big thanks to our UWRI colleagues for all their help as well.
Thank you.